The world you know is living on borrowed time. Harari points to the year. Look around you, not at the extraordinary or the unusual. Look at the ordinary, the way your morning begins, the way you communicate with the people you care about, the way your work is organized and evaluated, the way information reaches you, the way your city functions, the way your government makes decisions, the way your economy distributes what people need and want, the way human beings in your specific corner of the world understand what they are, what they owe each other, and what life is for. Now hold that picture and understand that most of what you are looking at will not exist in the form you currently know it within the lifetime of people alive today. Not because disaster is coming, though disasters are always possible, but because the specific configuration of the world you inhabit, what you recognize as normal, what you experience as simply the way things are, is the product of a technological, cultural, and economic moment that is already passing. What comes next will not be an upgraded version of the current arrangement. It will be something qualitatively different in ways that the current moment's frameworks are not adequate to fully anticipate. Yuval Noah Harari has been building toward a specific and urgent claim across decades of research and writing, and that claim has, in the last several years, crystallized into something more precise and more uncomfortable than the general observation that the world is changing rapidly. The claim is this: we are not merely living through a period of accelerated change within a stable civilizational framework. We are living through the dissolution of the framework itself. The assumptions, the structures, the shared stories and shared institutions that have organized human civilization across the past several centuries are losing their capacity to organize adequately. And the year by which the shape of what replaces them will be substantially determined if current trajectories continue is closer than most people find comfortable to acknowledge. To understand what Harari is pointing toward, we need to begin with what it actually means for a civilizational framework to dissolve. It does not mean that buildings fall or that people stop functioning. It means that the shared stories, the shared assumptions, and the shared institutions that coordinate human behavior at the largest scales begin to lose their credibility, their coherence, and their capacity to generate the collective agreement that makes large-scale human cooperation possible. We have seen this before. The dissolution of the medieval feudal order did not happen overnight. It happened through a slow accumulation of pressures, intellectual, economic, technological, and social, that gradually made the existing framework's assumptions less and less adequate to the realities people were actually encountering, until the gap between the framework and the lived experience of inhabiting it became too large to sustain. What followed was not merely adjustment, but transformation. A reconfiguration so deep that the people living in the middle of it often could not recognize its full extent until it was largely complete. We are, Harari argues, in the early stages of a comparable dissolution, not of feudalism this time, but of the specific configuration of industrial modernity, democratic nation-states, capitalist economies, humanist value systems, and the particular relationship between human beings and their cognitive tools that has organized the most technologically advanced societies across the past 2 to 3 centuries. And the specific technology that is driving the dissolution most directly, the technology whose development is both most rapidly advancing and most deeply consequential for the framework's continued viability, is artificial intelligence. The year matters because of what is expected to happen to AI capability within a specific window. We are currently living through what may be the most consequential phase of AI development, the phase in which AI systems transition from impressive but narrow tools into genuinely general-purpose cognitive agents capable of performing at human level or above across a broad and expanding range of intellectual and creative domains. This transition is not a prediction about a distant future. Its early stages are already visible in the systems deployed today, and the specific years of its deepest phase, the years when the capabilities that will restructure the most fundamental human economic and social arrangements reach the scale and the sophistication required to make that restructuring irreversible, are not measured in decades. Harari points toward the mid-2020s to mid-2030s as the window in which the most consequential decisions about AI development and governance will be made, and in which the effects of those decisions will begin to become structurally embedded in ways that make fundamental course correction exponentially more difficult. The specific year he points toward is not a single dramatic threshold. It is more like a corridor, a period during which several concurrent developments reach critical simultaneity. The development of AI systems capable of performing most cognitive tasks that currently require human expertise. The deployment of those systems at the scale required to fundamentally restructure the labor market, the information environment, and the distribution of economic and political power. And the hardening of the governance frameworks, or the absence of them, that will determine whether the transformation proceeds in ways that are broadly beneficial or in ways that dramatically concentrate the gains in the hands of a small number of actors while the costs are distributed across the broader population. The specific year that Harari points toward most precisely as a critical threshold is somewhere in the window of 2029 to 2033, not as the year when everything changes overnight, but as the period when the structural changes that are currently early stage will have advanced to the point where they are generating visible, measurable, and politically unavoidable disruptions to the most fundamental arrangements of the world you currently know. The disruptions to employment, as AI systems make routine and semi-routine cognitive labor economically redundant at large scale. The disruptions to the information environment, as AI-generated content becomes indistinguishable from human-generated content at scale, with profound consequences for what shared factual reality means. The disruptions to political governance, as AI systems become central to the management of economic and social systems in ways that concentrate unprecedented power in the hands of the entities that control them. These disruptions are not independently capable of dissolving a civilization. What makes them collectively capable of producing something more than ordinary disruption is the specific combination of their simultaneity, their speed, and their fundamental character. Previous technological disruptions have typically been sequential enough and slow enough to allow the institutional adaptation through which civilizations absorb technological change without losing the coherence of their organizing frameworks. The current disruption is not sequential and is not slow. It is happening across multiple fundamental dimensions simultaneously at a pace that the institutional frameworks through which democratic societies normally adapt to change were not designed to match. And it is targeting not the periphery of the current civilization's organization, but its center, the cognitive capacities, and the information infrastructure on which everything else depends. What does this mean for the specific features of the world you currently know and recognize as normal? Consider the economy first, because the economic dimension is the one that will be most immediately and most broadly felt by the largest number of people. The economy you know is organized around the exchange of human labor for compensation, in forms ranging from manual work to highly skilled professional and creative work across a vast spectrum of roles and industries. The assumption underlying this organization is that human beings have cognitive and physical capacities that are valuable to the production of goods and services, and that those capacities can be exchanged for the economic participation that allows people to meet their needs and construct their lives. This assumption has been the foundation of the economic organization of human societies since the Industrial Revolution, and its dissolution is not a minor adjustment. It is a transformation of the basic mechanism through which most human beings relate to the economic systems that determine their material conditions. The world after this dissolution, the world that is already emerging in the early stages that are visible today, will not be organized around this assumption. It will be organized around a different and as yet poorly understood relationship between human beings and economic systems whose productive capacity increasingly does not depend on human labor in the traditional sense. What that relationship looks like, whether it resembles liberation from the burden of labor or resembles the economic marginalization of large portions of humanity, will depend on decisions being made right now about how the gains from AI-driven productivity are distributed and what alternative bases for economic participation are developed for the people whose traditional labor is no longer economically necessary. Consider next the information environment. which is the dimension of the current world's organization that is perhaps most directly and most quickly being transformed by the specific capabilities of current AI systems. The world you know has an information environment that is imperfect, heavily influenced by economic and political interests, and far from the ideal of a free and accurate press-serving democratic deliberation. But it is an information environment in which a meaningful distinction still exists between authentic human communication and synthetic fabrication, and in which that distinction can, with significant effort, be maintained and evaluated. This distinction is one of the foundations of what remains of shared factual reality, which is itself one of the foundations of democratic governance. When an AI system can generate text, images, audio, and video that is indistinguishable from authentic human communication at scale and at essentially zero marginal cost, the foundation of that distinction begins to erode in ways whose ultimate consequences for shared reality and democratic governance have not yet been adequately reckoned with. The world you know is one in which, despite all the imperfections and all the distortions, there is still a meaningful sense in which human beings can attempt to agree on what actually happened, on what is actually true, on what the relevant evidence for a contested claim actually shows. This sense is already fragile and already under enormous pressure from the dynamics of the digital information environment. The addition of AI-generated synthetic media at scale to an information environment already struggling to maintain shared factual reality creates conditions in which the minimal requirements for democratic deliberation, the conditions of shared reference to a common world, are genuinely at risk. Consider finally the political dimension, because it is the dimension that will most directly determine whether the transformations in the economic and informational dimensions produce outcomes that are broadly beneficial or broadly harmful. The political world you know, however imperfect in its specific instantiations, is organized around the principle of democratic accountability, the principle that the people who wield the most consequential power over the lives of the governed are, in principle and to a significant degree in practice, accountable to those governed through mechanisms of democratic oversight, legal constraint, and institutional check and balance. This accountability is fragile and is already under significant stress from the concentration of economic and informational power that the digital economy has produced even before the full deployment of AI systems. The further concentration of power that AI deployment at scale is likely to produce in the entities that control the most capable AI systems creates conditions in which the mechanisms of democratic accountability that exist in the world you know may be genuinely insufficient. The world you know is living on borrowed time, not because catastrophe is inevitable. Harari is explicit and consistent about the fact that he does not regard catastrophe as inevitable or even as the most likely outcome. What he regards as most likely, if the current trajectory continues without adequate governance and adequate democratic engagement with the decisions being made, is not catastrophe in the dramatic sense, but something subtler and in some ways more difficult to address. A gradual drift into arrangements that are technically impressive and in many respects materially comfortable, but that involve a degree of concentration of power and a diminution of genuine human agency that constitutes a form of freedom loss so gradual and so embedded in the normal functioning of daily life that most people will not recognize it as loss until the alternatives have become genuinely unavailable. The borrowed time of the world you know is the time remaining in the window when the specific decisions that will determine whether the transformation produces broadly beneficial or broadly harmful outcomes are still genuinely available. When the governance frameworks that could constrain the most harmful concentrations of AI power could still be established. When the economic frameworks that could ensure broad distribution of the gains from AI productivity could still be designed and implemented. When the informational frameworks that could preserve the minimum conditions for shared factual reality and democratic deliberation could still be developed and deployed. This window is not indefinite. The specific years Harari points toward are the years when it will either be used or lost. The world you know has perhaps a decade, perhaps less, of the specific quality of plasticity in which the most fundamental decisions about what replaces it can still be made with something resembling democratic legitimacy and genuine collective choice. After that, the decisions will still be made. But they will be made within arrangements that have already substantially hardened by actors whose power within those arrangements is already substantially entrenched, and the range of alternatives that are genuinely available will be significantly narrower than it is right now. This is not cause for despair. It is cause for a specific quality of urgency that is compatible with genuine hope and genuine engagement. The world you know is ending. Not in fire, not overnight, not in any of the dramatic forms that the word ending most immediately evokes, but in the quieter, more fundamental way in which the frameworks that organize reality dissolve when the realities they were designed to describe change beyond the framework's capacity to contain them. What follows is genuinely undetermined. The decisions being made right now by people who mostly do not know that these are the most important decisions of their generation will substantially determine it. You are living inside the borrowed time. The loan is not due tomorrow, but the due date is visible from here. And the world you know, the one that feels permanent because you have always known it and the people around you have always known it, is already, quietly, necessarily passing. What matters is not whether it passes. It will. What matters is what the people living through the passing choose to build in its place. That is the question that the borrowed time is asking. And the window for answering it well is genuinely open, genuinely finite, and genuinely now.